The state of our Earth can be defined by how much climate change it experiences, and by the total amount of food that is available through agriculture and trade. The world has increased its agricultural production over the past centuries. At the same time, it has undergone climate change, partly as a result of activities related to agriculture. In 1850, the climate had not yet begun to change due to human activities, and food production was low. After 1950, world food production rose dramatically. Before 2000, we began to see evidence of human-induced climate change. Our climate will continue to change, given the greatly increased levels of greenhouse gases already in our atmosphere. Extreme events such as high temperatures, droughts, and floods are already more frequent and severe. Faced with growing demand for food, fodder, and bioenergy crops, many agriculture systems deplete soil fertility, biodiversity, and water resources. Many regions exhibit large gaps between potential and actual crop yields. The path our world takes in the future depends on the choices we make. To be sustainable in the long term, the world must stay within certain limits. This frontier curve represents the maximum amount of food we can grow under a given climate, if we do the best we can on every bit of land. It declines steeply under extreme climate change, which will have an adverse overall effect on agricultural production in the next few decades. Climate change will bring us toward, and perhaps over, critical food security thresholds in many regions. Areas currently suffering from food insecurity will be hit worst. This curve represents how much food we need to ensure everyone on Earth has adequate nutrition. The world's population will increase to around 9 billion by mid-century. It curves up under high climate change, as we will need more food to make up for greater crop losses due to climate variability and pest outbreaks. This curve represents the effect of increasing food production on climate change. As we clear more land for crops, apply more artificial fertilizer, and have larger livestock herds, the climate impact, already nearly a third of current climate change, increases. A sustainable future must be located within the space defined by these three limits. This is the safe space. Today, on a planet that grows sufficient food for all, 1 billion people go hungry. Another billion overconsume, increasing risks of chronic diseases. 1/3 of all food harvested is lost or wasted. Food waste in industrialized countries is almost as high as total net food production in sub-Saharan Africa. We are not in a safe space. This is where the world is heading by mid-century unless we make some big changes. Hundreds of millions will remain undernourished, and we will be perilously close to the limits of food production. We can take actions to enlarge the safe space and move the planet within its boundaries. First, by eliminating waste in the food chain, increasing equity in access to food, and shifting to vegetable-rich diets that demand fewer resources, we can reduce the amount of food we need. By investing in agricultural research and development, we can increase the amount of food we grow. We can also expand the safe space by adapting cropping systems to hotter climates through innovations such as improved crop genetics and careful matching of crops to environments. Ever higher average global temperatures will result in less greenhouse gas emissions are drastically reduced across a wide range of human activities. Agriculture must do its share. By carefully intensifying production on existing agricultural land, we can reduce on-site emissions and reduce deforestation. Sustainable intensification will help close the food yield gap while reducing emissions per unit of food produced. By reducing greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors, not only agriculture and forestry, we can slow down the onset and potential impacts of climate change. By implementing all these actions together, it is possible for Earth to survive and prosper in the long term, even with the substantially larger human population that it will carry in 40 years' time. We must transition the world into the safe operating space through collective decisions and actions. Our most powerful actions for meeting food security needs while reducing environmental impacts include improving crop yields, reducing waste, changing diets, adapting to climate change, and reducing agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. We can achieve food security in the face of climate change. Learn about key actions for moving into the safe space and explore successful innovations from around the world.
Years ago, small-scale producers were growing indigenous plants from community-cared and kept seeds, until powerful companies, in an attempt to commodify farming and food production, sold them patented and GM seeds along with chemical fertilizers and pesticides. While the benefits from having greater yields were enjoyed for a time, the overuse of chemical fertilizers and other modern farming methods have damaged the land and environment. This, along with the rising price of oil, has meant that many can no longer afford or access the industrialized farming methods that now dominate global food production. Many large-scale farmers receive financial assistance through large subsidies, but small-scale farmers don't have the support or the resources to boost production. Weather unpredictability from climate change is affecting crops with drought, flooding, and other severe and erratic weather changes. Small-scale producers are often lacking proper storage for their produce, so they cannot store their food for the winter or create stable income from a stored harvest in the off-season. They have challenges getting their produce to markets because of bad infrastructure, and expensive middlemen, along with cheap imported food, have created markets with prices that local producers cannot compete with. Women produce the majority of food, but their challenges are multiplied because they don't have the same rights to the land as men. Governments in developing countries are pushing people off their land and offering it to foreign governments and corporations for extremely cheap prices. They invest in offshore land to grow crops for food and fuel. Once it's grown and harvested, it's sent out of the country, leaving its people with uncertainty about where their land or food will come from. Currently, 1/3 of corn crops grown in America are used for biofuels. Now that the demand for biofuel has taken over available cropland, companies look elsewhere to grow their corn. But filling an average-sized car with biofuel amounts to as much maize as the average African person consumes in an entire year. And the less food there is for people, the more the food prices go up. Industrial farming to make biofuels also results in large amounts of CO2 being released into the atmosphere, accelerating climate change and reversing the positive effects that cleaner fuels have. Big investors are treating food as another traded commodity, and while it means big profits for agribusiness firms, most people are suffering because of it. The UN is calling for an investigation into the possibility that global food prices are being artificially pushed up by financial speculators. The prices of staple food could more than double in the next 20 years, and the demand for fuels used in industry and transport is adding to the increase. We have enough food on our planet to feed everyone, but hunger and obesity are indicators that our food system is not working. Around 1/3 of all food produced is not consumed but wasted. This amounts to nearly 1.3 billion tonnes. In wealthy countries, food is wasted when corporations, retailers and consumers toss perfectly edible portions into the bin. In underdeveloped nations, food goes to waste due to bad infrastructure and inefficient distribution. A few powerful governments and companies dominate the global food system. 3 agribusiness firms control nearly 90% of grain trading between them. They have utilised advances in science and technology to boost production, but they have failed to adopt sustainable practices to ensure the survival of our environmental systems. Food is responsible for up to 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Too many of the ways we grow food today are using up and destroying the natural resources we rely on. Arable land per person is decreasing, having almost halved since 1960, and water is even scarcer than land. Agriculture accounts for 70% of global freshwater use. The rising demand for oil to fuel our factories, power our cars, and meet our consumerist needs, as well as the increasing demand for meat and dairy products, is putting added pressure on the system. By 2050, there'll be 9 billion people on the planet, and demand for food will have increased by 70%. As seasons and rainfall patterns become more erratic and unpredictable due to climate change, it will be even harder for farmers to know when to sow, cultivate, and harvest their crops. On top of this, extreme weather events can wipe out harvest in a single stroke. The global food system must be transformed. It's actually already started, and in most cases, governments aren't leading it. It's changing from the roots with individuals, organisations and movements connecting globally via vision for a healthy system that supports everyone. A growing desire for change has been gaining momentum, and its focus is a system with global solidarity, where we listen to the unheard voices and needs of all and act out of cooperation not competition. Where we share resources fairly and value the environment, and where everyone has enough to eat, always. This shared vision that is growing from the roots is pressuring governments and corporations to change their old ways, giving way to innovation and increasing solidarity. Consumers are putting pressure on companies to shift to ethical and sustainable practices. Governments are now being forced to intervene on rising food prices, and steps are being taken toward better policies and trade agreements. Whether you work on a local, regional, national or global level, you can be a part of the movement to grow a better future. These are what some of the possibilities look like, but they are just the beginning. New ways of thinking, producing and consuming. A paradigm shift in agriculture towards more sustainable and ecologically friendly practices that benefit the world's 900 million small farmers, not just agribusiness. We don't just focus on crop yields, we focus on quality and distribution, better waste management, sustainable consumption and green consumerism. Adaptation to climate change and a reduced vulnerability to impacts, as well as a global deal on climate change to ensure countries are working together towards more sustainable practices. We preserve our resources and share them fairly. We take action on trade agreements. We regulate banks and reform bad policies. We support small-scale, environmentally friendly production methods based on local knowledge. Women are empowered and the door is open for them to join the conversation on land use. We support communities to fight against corporations that are trying to push them off their land. We invest in smallholder agriculture so that communities can support themselves and don't go to bed hungry. How are you and your community impacted by the global food crisis? What are people doing to address these issues in your community? How can you help grow the movement?
Asia, more than half of humanity. 3.5 billion people live in this continent, in very different natural surroundings and with great ethnic differences. The majority can be grouped together in 6 countries, including China and India, the 2 most populated nations on the planet. Highly advanced technologies exist side by side with primitive forms of agriculture, which continues to be the dominant sector throughout the continent and is of vital importance for the food security of billions of people. The major economic and social transformations that are taking place have not radically changed the general picture. The vast majority of low-income families survive in rural areas with activities linked to agriculture and animal raising. This is how the greatest number of the poor in an absolute sense live in Asia today. The condition of women today takes on very different aspects. The progress made by women in cities, with education, in their professional choices and in the social importance they have thus gained, often conceals the reality of hundreds of millions of rural women, constantly looking for water, food, and all the resources necessary to guarantee food safety for their families.
The decision making is the men, but the women, they are responsible for the finance, say money in the family. It's a woman who holds the purse.
Bangladesh is a patriarchal society where men, women do not have equal relationship. Women are subordinate and inferior, but for last few years we have been working. Women of Bangladesh have been struggling, and they have been continuing their movements for women and gender equality, and a process of empowerment has started.
Discrimination between the sexes is still strong. Families tend to prefer boys, and in some countries the percentages of abortions and deaths due to malnutrition are much higher for girls. In China, a country undergoing great changes, with a strong migration from the countryside to the cities, 22% of the world's population has only 7% of the arable land, and women represent 46% of the agricultural labor force. I'm 64 and a widow. I live alone with one of my children and look after the orchard. He works in the fields. We grow wheat, potatoes, beans and broad beans. The expansion of agricultural production has allowed women to add income produced in the home to that from their work in the fields, for example, by raising Angora rabbits, and has drastically reduced food shortages in the whole of the country, although the per capita extension of cultivated plots is considerably less than the average. Rice is a staple food for more than half the world's population and has spread from Asia to other continents. Women have a decisive role in all the phases of its production, and their contribution represents between 50% and 90%. The countries of Southeastern Asia, traditionally major consumers of rice, have today become exporters on the international market too, thanks to women's work. There isn't a grain of rice that hasn't passed through a woman's hands, as they say in Indonesia. Aquaculture, which in rural areas provides food and extra income for families, is a collateral activity carried out mainly by women. Almost 90% of world production comes from Asia. 120 million people in the world carry out activities linked to fishing, with more than 50 million tons of fish used annually for food. Different techniques of conservation and drying are used alongside the sale of fresh fish on the market. Thanks to irrigation and the use of fertilizers, crops have far greater yields and more specialized and profitable products can be grown, such as flowers. But a new ecological conscience is also growing amongst women against the uncontrolled use of pesticides.
We use a lot of pesticides in our food. Still in our culture, in our homes, it is the women who cook the food and prepare the food. So I think more and more women are conscious of this, and we try to use less food additives and flavorings and things like that, artificial flavorings in our food.
Despite the continual expansion of megalopolises, the majority of Asian families are still country dwellers. In India, more than 15 million rural families are headed by women. Estimates put the native, tribal population of the Indian subcontinent at 70 million. They live near the forests, practicing subsistence agriculture and gathering natural products. In recent years, state organizations have granted incentives to the tribal communities to manage the forest resources. This has given greater importance to the work of women, who are mainly responsible for gathering and processing products such as tamarind, nux vomica, honey, nuts, roots, resins and others, which have gained in value due to the new ecological demand. Major campaigns are underway throughout the continent to increase schooling and reduce illiteracy rates, which are still very high for adult women. Vocational and professional training courses are becoming more widespread and also have as their aim the creation of a new class of female entrepreneurs.
They can help women who would love to start and give their experience and knowledge. So it was started as a business counseling unit. Almost 2,000 ladies annually come for business counseling and help rural women to come and have some knowledge of how and to be self-sustaining.
I am start with one public booth and cold storage for bakery items. I am 36 years old. I have 2 sons. I am to ముందుకు రావాలంటే ఏం చెప్పాలా? I am self-employment to come forward with my own self-business.
The policy of giving credit to women is now widely recognized as a decisive resource for development. It is precisely in Asia that microloans for groups of Asian women have produced the most satisfactory results. The beneficiaries have a high rate of solvency, as shown by the very large percentage of loans paid back. This opportunity creates forms of mutual aid between women and is an important economic tool of empowerment. There are very many small, individually run businesses or cooperatives which try to increase activities that are collateral to agriculture, such as the production of raw silk. Skill and patience are essential to raise silkworms. At exactly the right moment, they have to be put on large trays, divided into rings, and the cocoon will develop inside this. The cocoon is then boiled before the silkworm becomes a butterfly, and then spun. Expert female hands give rise to these hanks of fine silk, appreciated the world over. In Asia, the main objective of rural women, aided in this by the FAO and other international organizations, is to create opportunities that will eradicate poverty from the countryside, reaching equality with men in food security. The future of the continent is in the hands of these young women, in the respect of their cultural diversity.
cornfields, one of the world's biggest sources of food, but much of the harvest ends up being expensively processed into fuel for gas-guzzling cars. Just one example of how the push for biofuels is going wrong, according to this government review.
The basic principle and policy at the time was probably okay. What has happened, unfortunately, it's developed unchecked in parts of the world where there have been unintended consequences. We need to recognise those and now put it right.
The report says biofuels can help fight climate change, but they're forcing up food prices. Oilseeds could go up 70% in some parts of the world by 2020, hitting the poorest hardest. In India alone, an extra 10 million people could be driven into poverty. And clearing forests and peatlands to grow biofuels could add far more greenhouse gas than could ever be saved. Our fuel tanks already contain a small percentage of biofuel, which is set to rise in the next few years. The review calls for a slowdown until proper controls are in place. And in Parliament today, the government agreed.
We do have a moral obligation to try and, as it were, weed out the impact of bad biofuels on food prices, but also potentially increasing overall CO2 emissions.
Some biofuels are seen as positive. Sugarcane in Brazil produces syrup, and the waste makes fuel as well. Future generations of biofuels should be more efficient. The challenge is what to do now. Our targets for biofuels are set within the European Union, so any change needs to be renegotiated. And America's farmers are enjoying massive subsidies to produce the fuel. Growers in Malaysia and Indonesia are making good money from it as well. So the government here may be backing down, but how much can it slow what's become a global biofuel juggernaut?
One of the challenges, though, is that when we did the early research in this area, we found that 90% of us just didn't realise we were throwing the food away. And I think that was sort of coming across in what we've just listened to, is we've sort of got ourselves into the habit of throwing food away. It's only when we actually get it really brought to our attention do we start doing something about it.
Seems a bit odd that you can't realise what you're putting in the bin.
Yeah, I think it is quite strange, but it's strange. 9 out of 10 of us just didn't realise. It was only when we got people to do diaries, or in fact if you do separate food waste collections, and actually see what you throw away. It was only at that time people think, oh yeah, actually I do. And it's interesting, when you go and actually do one-to-one with people or go into their houses and say, let's just talk about food waste, which we've been doing with people like the Women's Institute as part of Love Food, Hate Waste. You know, people really think, oh crikey, yes, I really am throwing a lot away, and it's costing me a lot of money. and people can save. It's staggering. It's 10 billion as a nation. If we just ate the food we could have eaten that we currently now throw away, it would save us £10 billion a year.
The problem is, it's a reflection, I suppose, of our convenient way of living. We've got used to doing a sort of big one-stop shop, having convenience foods in the fridge, thinking maybe I'll eat a few more vegetables and fruit this week than I actually will. At the end of the week, it's easier to throw them out than to actively think about changing your habits, isn't it?
Well, I think there's a lot in that. I think we have got out of the habit of just planning and preparing and storing our food. So what was the reasons why we're throwing all these food away? Well, there seem to be two coming out of the research that we've done. Two big ones. One is, not storing things so you get the optimal life. For example, you know, apples will last a great deal longer in the fridge. You know, freezing things, for example. And the other thing is actually cooking more than we need. So getting the right portions right and just cooking exactly the amount of rice we need for 4 people rather than making a guess, and then not being able to use the leftovers that come out at the other side. So those two things coming together are real factors, and actually they're relatively simple things we can all do now, which will save money and reduce our impact on the environment.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking in personal terms, I suppose, to individuals, it will save you money. The message Gordon Brown is trying to get out there today is a much broader one, talking about the overall cost of food and saying if we're all more economical, there'll be less demand, prices will come down. But does that argument actually add up to much when you look at the other elements that are pushing up the price of food? Growing populations, climate change, fuel costs that are rising, which is increasing the cost of transporting food. I mean, how much of an issue is this in the overall cost of food?
Well, if you think about it, we're throwing away 1/3 of what we buy. So that's equivalent to us going shopping, buying 3 bags of shopping and then putting one of those straight into the bin. That's got to have a significant effect on the amount of food that's available. It's got to have a significant effect on the prices that we're paying. And so therefore, you know, it's not the only factor. Of course it's not. And you've just given a list of things that it's also to do with. The key thing is, it's something we can all do something about tomorrow, should we choose to do so. And there is help out there to show, to actually help us all do it. And let's be honest, we used to do this, and it's a question of getting back into that habit. You know, as a society, we've done this.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They learn much more than I never knew. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for the daily races, going nowhere, going Strangers are filling up their glasses. No expression, no expression. Hide my head, I wanna drown my sorrow. No tomorrow, no tomorrow. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world. Children waiting for the day they feel good. Happy birthday, happy birthday. And to feel the way that every child should sit and listen, sit and listen. Went to school and I was very nervous. No one knew me, no one knew me. Hello teacher, tell me what's my lesson. Look right through me, look right through me. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world. Enlarging your world. Mad world.
Biofuels, promoted as a green alternative to conventional fuels like petrol and diesel, and made from food grains like corn. But now there is a debate. Does the biofuel boom mean bust for food grains?
The energy crisis has forced the world to look for alternatives, and the spotlight has fallen on the food market. If corn can produce edible oil, then why can't it produce oil to drive a car? It can, and it is. The European Union has said at least 5% of oil used in automobiles must be biofuel by 2010. But that directive is now being looked at again as a global food crisis looms.
Here in Europe, some are calling it the Great Green Fuel Gamble. Sweden already has 1,000 biofuel stations and incentives for green car users. But most other European countries are cutting down on generous subsidies for biofuel farming over rising concerns that biofuels may not be as sustainable or even as green as earlier imagined, especially if they come at the cost of agricultural land being swallowed up by profitable biofuel crops.
So how big is the risk? Take the example of maize. Globally, maize production went up by 40 million tons last year. Of this, 30 million tons were used to produce ethanol. The result? Global maize prices almost doubled. But diversion of food grains for biofuels is just one part of the trade-off. The other is farmland. Even when biofuel is extracted from non-food plants like Jatropha, commercial cultivation could mean loss of fertile food grain land. As India readies its biofuel policy, it has some food for thought. As a World Bank report puts it, the maize needed to produce enough ethanol to fill up an SUV tank can feed a man for a year. With Supriya Sharma, Tisha Shrivastava for NDTV.
2 billion people in the world are food insecure. Food insecurity is not knowing if you'll have enough food to eat today, tomorrow, or if you're a farmer, when food from your harvest runs out. The most extreme form of food insecurity is famine. If I'm food secure, I always have enough calories and the right kinds of food to lead a healthy and active life. Floods and drought make farmers vulnerable to losing their source of food or income overnight. Conflict forces people to flee their homes and reduces the amount of food farmers can grow. International trade rules can hurt local farmers and entrepreneurs by putting them out of business and cutting jobs. Most poor farmers don't own the land they farm and risk losing it. When governments don't invest enough in local agriculture, countries produce less food and depend more on imported food. The poor spend up to 80% of their earnings on food, so any rise in food prices means they have to cut back on the number of meals they eat. If you grow up without enough food, your body is weaker and you'll find it harder to escape poverty. Your kids are likely to grow up hungry too. But the world produces more than enough food to feed everyone. The challenge is to make sure everyone can access it.
Can you imagine living without clean water, a comfortable home, access roads and electricity? Approximately 35% of Malaysians currently live in rural areas. Basic infrastructure such as clean water, livable homes, access roads and electricity is essential to provide them with a better quality of life. In order to implement this, one of the initiatives identified under the National Key Results Area (NKRA) is improving rural basic infrastructure. This NKRA is led by our Minister of Rural and Regional Development, Datuk Seri Muhammad Shafi'i Haji Abdal. Most rural communities rely on water from rivers and rain harbours. These sources may be unclean and could lead to waterborne diseases. By providing them with chlorinated clean water that is safe for consumption, the general health and sanitisation of rural folks have improved greatly. Having a decent roof under your head to live in is a basic necessity. The government is aware of the hardships faced by low-income households and have built and restored over 16,000 homes and laid over 700 kilometres of access roads to rural areas. This increased connectivity promotes economic activities and increases the livelihood of rural communities. While we may take electricity for granted, for thousands of those living in the dark, receiving electricity supply brings forth a light in their lives. With over 27,000 homes receiving electricity for the first time, their lives have certainly changed for the better. Through our efforts towards improving rural basic infrastructure, to date, we have already connected over 12,000 kampungs nationwide and significantly touched and changed the lives of over 2 million people. The government is committed and will continue to pave the way towards providing the rakyat with an ever-improving standard of rural development. This is an initiative of the Government Transformation Program. Thank you for watching this video. Should you have any comments or inquiries, do feel free to contact us.
Saya bersyukur kepada Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. Bajet ini adalah merupakan satu bajet yang agak menyeluruh. Kalau kita lihat, dia tidak memaparkan tentang projek-projek yang begitu besar. Dia banyak touch the base kepada kepentingan rakyat yang diberi keutamaan, dan tidak lupa daripada itu, luar bandar merupakan sektor yang diberi tumpuan yang agak besar, dan kalaupun ada pihak menyatakan bahawa tidak ada keseimbangan, banyak pembangunan peruntukan diseluruhkan di peringkat pusat dan bandar. Pada kali ini bajet kita ketara kelihatan bahawa Yang Amat Berhormat banyak memberi perhatian dan peruntukan yang begitu besar dari segi pembangunan, peruntukan sejumlah 7.2 bilion ringgit, itu dari segi pembangunan, pengurusan dalam lingkungan 5 bilion, hampir 12 bilion dalam bajet 2012. Dan dari segi pembangunan, kita dapat melihat selain daripada konsep yang telah pun diperkenalkan oleh Yang Amat Berhormat menerusi NKRA, iaitu pembangunan basic infrastructure yang ada, iaitu dari segi jalan, air, bekalan elektrik dan kemudahan perumahan, pendekatan yang baru yang kita lihat diperkenalkan oleh Yang Amat Berhormat menerusi reform, iaitu transformasi pembangunan kemajuan luar bandar dengan memperkenalkan RTP, iaitu Rural Transformation Program. Ada 8 inisiatif yang kita dapat melihat diberi keutamaan menerusi program ini. Selain daripada itu, yang memaju RTP ini ialah RTC, iaitu Rural Transformation Center yang telah pun diumumkan tadi. Di antaranya ialah di Gopeng di Perak dan juga di Kelantan, ya, dan termasuk akan kita bangun kemudahan center ini di negeri Sarawak dan Sabah. Tapi untuk menjana keadaan ini, iaitu selain daripada dia tidak menyentuh dari segi pembangunan prasarana, pembangunan rural transformation ini, dia akan menumpukan tentang kegiatan ekonomi, supaya Yang Amat Berhormat menyatakan perlu kita adunkan kemajuan luar bandar bukan hanya dalam konteks infrastruktur jalan. Rakyat perlu duit, rakyat perlu kemudahan pekerjaan, ya. Jadi di situ diadunkan program-program seperti peruncitan, perbankan dan juga latihan-latihan yang akan dilakukan. Penggabungan ini akan dilaksanakan oleh agensi-agensi, diutamakan oleh Kementerian Kemajuan Luar Bandar dan juga Kementerian Pertanian, dan dibantu oleh agensi-agensi yang lain.
Aziza Othman and her children used to share this simple house with 3 other families. Only able to find occasional work, she lived on less than $15 a month. She would have still been saddled with poverty had she not been lucky enough to be chosen for an experiment by a Malaysian company.
I feel blessed to be part of this. It's turned my family's life around. We can afford to buy things now.
First, the company called Iris gave her a new home in a newly built village with all the modern amenities. Then she was given a job on the village's farm, making use of technology to grow better, healthier plants. Aziza now earns some $500 a month. The goal of the experiment, to build a community with the proper tools to fully support itself. According to the UN, 76% of the world's poor live in rural areas. Usually they're forced to the cities where they have to live in slums to try to eke out a living. This Malaysian company, though, believes that its solution could change that and give people the reason to stay in the villages. On a rooftop in Malaysia's capital, Iris's founder, Tan Se Jim, is fine-tuning the model by dabbling with different kinds of fruits and vegetables and different ways of watering them. He's even started to use fish to clean and recycle that water and provide additional fertilizer for the plants.
At the restaurant, 300 ringgit per kilo.
In turn, the fish can be sold, so can the produce. The house has also been improved. Iris says it can now build a home in just 10 days from precast panels. It's cheaper than conventional methods, and he says better quality.
Our dignity has to be the same. Just because he's richer than me, just because I'm poorer, doesn't mean I'm not allowed or I'm not entitled to the same things in life.
The project caught the eye of Malaysia's government, which has paid the company to build 10 villages this year. Free-range chickens make up the final piece of a community designed to be fully self-supporting. While in its early stages, it's a project Aziza says has planted the seeds of hope that the shadow of poverty can one day be lifted from struggling rural communities. Steve Chow, Al Jazeera, Pahang, Malaysia.
You're watching UNICEF Television.
It's a 1-hour longboat journey to the nearest clinic for Umba, a young Iban mother of 2 living deep in the heart of Sarawak's rainforest. She is among 10% of the Malaysian population living outside a 5-kilometer radius of a health facility. But Umba does not have to make many trips to the clinic, thanks to the government's Village Health Promoter Program. Through community participation, this outreach program trains volunteers in general first aid and simple care and treatment. Back home, these newly trained village health promoters serve as agents of change, supporting families who are hard to reach, ensuring every mother and child's basic health needs are met.
My VHP taught me that if I don't take my child for regular checkups, I wouldn't know the health status of my child. To protect my child from preventable illnesses, I learned that it is important for me to take the necessary precautions by immunizing my child.
Over the last 3 decades, the Malaysian government's commitment to health has produced positive results. Maternal mortality rates have dropped from 141 deaths to less than 40 deaths in 100,000 births in 2003, while infant and child mortality rates have also been reduced to less than 9 deaths in every 1,000 live births in 2002.
Malaysia has made remarkable progress for its women and children. Its under 5 mortality rate and maternal mortality rate are among the lowest in the world. It's reached out to its children and women, whether in urban areas or remote rural areas. The Village Health Promoters Scheme has been part of that success story.
The Village Health Promoter Program demonstrates the government's commitment of reaching out to the excluded and invisible, strengthening community empowerment and improving the lives of every citizen. This is Lydia Luban reporting for UNICEF. For every child, advance humanity.